Hello and welcome to the Hagir Show on the Hagir Network. We are glad to see you again on another episode on Bridging the Gap. I have here with me a young professional. We are going to get to know him and dive into Bridging the Gap. Welcome, Ladin, and can you please introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the network. It's nice to be here. It's good to see everyone. My name is Laden, of course. I grew up between the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Abu Dhabi. And then I went to undergrad at Penn State. I studied political science and philosophy. And now I'm currently pursuing my Juris Doctorate degree at Columbia Law School, aiming to be a corporate attorney based in New York.
Amazing, amazing. I heard a lot about you from Ayub, and you know, um, part of what we do here in the network is trying to not just bridge a gap, we raise awareness. Most of our work is to get people connected with ways that they can improve their life, whether going back to school, finding a business, finding a job, or even just integrating, simply being in a different culture or growing up in a different household. So bridging the gap is one of the programs that it's dear to my heart. Now, when it started is to talk to parents and young adults just like you who grew up and there's so much going on in the world right now. So talk to us about your upbringing. Let's just start by that and talk about the things that should have went better. I'm not talking about the family, but the world in general. And what the things that you want to be or see people in your age and this generation or the generation after you benefit from. I know it's a big question.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, it's a big question. So I'll take the first part as to my upbringing and maybe some of the negative things. But I can start with a little bit of a backstory. So my parents, they're both Sudanese. They met in Qatar. And at the time, my dad was pursuing his residency. And so after they'd gotten married, they moved to Philadelphia. And my dad was doing his residency at UPenn, and they had me. They had me in the first year of their marriage, and then we moved around the U.S. We moved outside of Pennsylvania to Jersey, and then later to Texas. And most of my memories in the U.S. as a young boy or baby were in Texas because I was old enough to remember them. I moved to Texas when I was about the third grade. And we left the United States when I was about 10 years old. But during the time that I was in Texas, I recall we were at Hawk Elementary School in Denton, Texas, which is a small town outside of Dallas. And one day in particular, my sister came back from school, tears in her eyes,
Mm.
explaining how a teacher had told her that her son was in Afghanistan killing Muslims and that she was proud of him.
Oh,
So you have to realize this is Texas in 2009. This is a very different Texas. This is a very different United States of America.
mhm.
So I left when I was 10, back to or not back to, but to that area of the world that my parents are very familiar with, the Arabian Gulf, the Khalij.
Mm.
The reason why my dad moved us there out of the United States is because he wanted us to be closer to our culture, closer to our language, closer to our people. And of course, many of those things I've been privileged to be very close to growing up there. So I think a little bit about what I would want the youth to improve upon is just to be very conscious of the words and the terms and the ways in which you describe people in outgroups
Mm.
when you're in communities that are very diverse. I don't think that that teacher in particular was intending to harm my sister Maryam in the classroom or to make her feel uncomfortable. She probably had no idea that she was Muslim. She probably had no Maryam is a name that many different religions, cultures use. She probably had no idea that she was Sudanese or anything like that. But she was insensitive and she was sort of engulfed in the political rhetoric at the time surrounding American foreign policy in the Middle East.
Mhm.
So a lot of times when we are so confined to our own in groups, we are using language which inherently others groups of people which are not within that group. So we have to be careful about the language that we use. We have to be proactive in reaching out to other groups and saying, when we refer to you, in which way would you like to be referred? How can we do it in a way that's not, you know, offensive or things like that? So just being culturally sensitive is one thing I want the youth to understand.
That's a good point. But you just said like your family and most people who want their kids to get closer to their culture or learn the language, what they do is what your parent did is taking you out of that of a different culture and bringing you closer to your own culture. Do you feel like that made you like the move, different moves from different culture, languages, the school system? Was that affecting you negatively, or you think it was something that needed at that moment?
I think both. I think, you know, when you're early on in your development as a kid and you make friends, so kids actually generally make friends much more quickly and easier than adults do. And so for me, I was making friends at an even faster pace than normal kids because I was losing friends so quickly because we just got out of touch, right? So I would just
Yeah,
always be forced in a new environment to adapt very quickly and to present myself anew, right? To recreate myself, right? To reinvent myself is the word.
yeah,
And so in that sense, like looking back, I think that it made me very adaptive. It made me um, very quick at making friends, which are two things that I really value. The negative is that you don't have the stability and sort of like the long-term consistency a lot of people do. A
yeah.
lot of people speak about having friends from that they grew up together since they were little kids, you know. Those are privileges that you're not afforded, but I think all in all, on balance, it was a net positive.
Okay, all right. That's the good way to do it. And there's a lot of people. For example, I would like to like pick your brain with this. The cultures are different, but every culture, Sudanese culture, American, any culture would have its positive and its negative aspect, right? So how can we use, like, for example, if you're staying and you don't have the privilege of going or moving your kids away and taking them to learn the culture, you want to do it here. Do you think it's a hard thing to do? And why are we, as a Sudanese community in general, that you might not have the answer for all of that, but why people are um, closed up? Like most of our Sudanese people are trying to either make their kids follow the same Sudanese tradition, everything, even if they're here in the US or in any different country, and not trying to adapt and learn about the new culture, take the good and leave the bad. This, to me, is, I think it's a big issue because every culture, like you said, have its negative and its positive. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from many different angles. I think in some sense there is a kind of feeling of fear, a feeling that or inferiority, you know, when Sudanese communities, you know, you immigrate here to the United States feeling as though you could never be like them. Or in other communities, it's in a moral sense, I shouldn't ever want to be like them. Very principled. I think Sudanese, as a community, we're very proud people. We love our country, we love our tradition, we love our heritage, and we have a lot to love and we have a lot to be proud of.
Mhm.
But I think ultimately we also have a lot to learn. As a young, developing country, you only had independence in '56, you know, we're babies in terms of our country, right? Our country's in its infantile stage, so we still have so much to learn. So I think also recognition that we have such a rich history and tradition, but also as a nation state, we're so young. So we have so many lessons to import from abroad and to learn from abroad. But it's a difficult thing to do because what's most important is maintaining that foundation, right, of oneself and not surrendering that to the new culture or not trading that or swapping that with the new culture. And that's something I struggle with all the time. Like it's a very difficult thing, and I'm not sure if I'm actually succeeding at it. But I think you have to constantly be. I'll give you an example. I have a friend. His name is Ahmed Osman. He's in Colombia, but he's in construction administration school. He came from Sudan, maybe January of last year, before the war broke out in May. And he's a little bit older than me, but such an open-minded guy, but so in touch with the realities in Sudan. MashaAllah, is very well connected. He has a great community, right? So being around him, I feel like I learn and absorb so much, just by proximity to him. So it's about surrounding yourself with diverse Sudanese perspectives. I'm more Americanized than he is, and he's more maybe authentically Sudanese than I am in some ways. But the fact is, we're all part of the Sudanese diaspora, and we're all part of the diverse experiences which encapsulate what it means to be Sudanese. So,
And that's one way to look at it. And I'm so proud of your generation. Most of you guys are able, whether you grew up in a family that foster this or rejected the culture in its complete. Like I have many family members and people who will say, oh, I want to raise them the same way here. I don't want them to learn anything about the out or the culture they're in. And that to me is, if you don't like anything about this culture, then go where, like, life is too short. Go to where you are, like, you feel like this is where you belong. But you can't, this is apply more pressure on the kids, not the adult per se, because we came here, everything is set already. We know what we brought with us, our culture and everything. So it's okay to use your culture and introduce it to other people, but rejecting a whole society and a whole community while you're living in it, it's to me, it's problematic because at the end of the day, it is going to affect the people you bring in. If someone did not grow up in Sudan, born here, or came here young, and you try to completely isolate them or stop them from being who they are, right? This is create a friction and it's also push a lot of kids to be like to go a different route, whether that taking drugs or going to jail or even just becoming leaving their family because they felt like I'm living two different lives and I have to do. So this, I'm not sure if I made sense with what I just said. You got what I'm trying to ask you, but like how can we fix this if it is a problem? If you don't see it as a problem, how we can help the parents, like such as I'm a parent, I'm 37 years old. So my kids grew up here and I try to introduce them to the Sudanese culture. They know everything, but I also became a part of what they do and was open to know what they love and adapt to that. So from your point, which way we should do and why?
yeah, no, I think it's a huge issue, and I think you kind of touched on a major part of it where you're trying to also learn. Like, despite the fact that you're also a mother, you're trying to learn your kids' perspective. I think in the Sudanese community, it's usually inverted in the sense that the kids are supposed to learn the parents' perspective, right?
Yeah,
But what the parents fail to realize oftentimes is the situations under which they, went their development, right, are very different than the
mm,
situations that the kids find themselves in. And so what has to change is if your environment is different, the way that you react and the way that you behave is going to be different. So I
yes,
think parents are like still stuck in the environment that they've grown up in and trying to enforce that on their children. But what's crucial is the older generation has to look towards the children and be like, you guys have challenges that we didn't have. Of course, life for us was challenging in other ways. I mean, a lot of us are first generation American, the Sudanese that are here. Our parents moved here. So they have a whole host of issues that they had to go through to bring us here. So from their perspective, it's like you're in a very privileged position. The least you can do is pay homage to everything that we did and your culture and where you come from, right? But
hmm
at the same time, you have to recognize that this generation is living in a vastly different world, in a different side of the world at that, and in a vastly different time. So it's difficult enough for people who are here, who are Americans, for two different generations to understand each other with the age of the internet and everything that's going on. Add on to that, moving across the world or experiencing different cultures or different languages. On top of that, that is immense amount of change. And that immense amount of change is going to produce people who are very different in the previous generation. But what's important to do is not to put a value judgment there. Not to say old generation is better, new generation better. No, they're both good in their own respective ways, insofar as they're pursuing education, insofar as they're trying to become more cultured, insofar as they are trying to better themselves in whatever possible way. Everything should be accepted, you know?
and provide them with tools like how your parent did. And growing up, I think you touched on something very important that as parent we take it as it is a privilege for you to be born to us, to serve us. And this is something that, a lot of parents that I know or grew up around, they feel like, okay, I'm bringing a child to life so they can help me when I'm old. And that's okay. Like, you are going to help your parent, but what will get you to that point? You have to be a good parent. You have to try your best to teach your kids to be what you think it's good for them and for you, but not expect this as a return. Like, don't make them feel, I hear this all the time, like, I've done this for you. I didn't ask you to give birth to me. And this is not saying it in a mean way. Like, this is your choice as a parent to give birth to a child, right? So you brought that child, you took care of them, very good, and good for you, good for them, but this is not a privilege. That's my opinion, at least. Um, as a mother, and I try not to do it with my kids or like to make them feel like this is a return. You do it out of love. But for the other part of assimilating, when we have kids who are born in here or came here in a young age, right? So they are going to learn, beside the struggles that you just mentioned, they are going to learn the culture here. They're going to go with their friend and they're going to spend more time at school with their friends, knowing the culture, living in that culture. And if you reject it completely, what do you think the reaction will be? Like, some of the things that you saw or noticed as a result of either being too strict with your kids or just too lenient, or at the same time not understanding, not having communication.
Yeah. There's really interesting ideas and literature on repression and overly repressive societies. They tend to actually incentivize in kind of a perverse way extreme action, right? So even if you look at in many places, like I grew up in Saudi Arabia, which might be one of the most repressive areas. This is prior to when women could drive. This is prior to when women could walk on the street without wearing full tarha, even if they weren't Muslim or weren't Arab or whatever it had to be. And in this society, you saw a lot of things go on. I don't want to mention them right now because I'm sure this is a very vast audience family, but you saw a lot of things that this culture would not approve of, and in its most extreme and diabolical forms,
Mhm.
right? The point is, if you are too extreme, you're going to encourage the next generation to be like, to hell with this. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm the opposite direction.
Exactly.
What you want to do is you want to incentivize it rather than punish. If your child, say, goes out and starts smoking or something like that, right?
Mhm.
The best one thing that a parent can do is they can say, you know what, I'm going to punish you. This is a terrible thing to do. This is horrible. But then the next day, the child goes, puts their gym clothes on, and goes to play basketball or goes to the gym, and you see them working out all day, and they don't say anything to them. Then it's just like, come back home, come eat dinner. No, when they do that behavior, reward them, right? If you reward the good behavior, they're gonna do it over and over and over again, rather than you punishing the bad behavior.
Mhm.
Punish the bad behavior, they're gonna feel restricted, constrained. Of course, we still have to discipline and punish, right? But it has a time and place, and that time and place is not as broad as it's currently being implemented. So I think that's one thing: rewarding rather than punishing, rewarding good behavior rather than punishing bad. That's the main thing. Another thing is just being more open. I think something I'm really grateful for is my parents always allowed me to make choices for myself, you know?
Mhm.
And so when I was an adult and I left the house, it wasn't like this was the first time that I was making decisions for myself,
Mhm.
right? So if your parents tell you how to do everything when you're in the household,
Mhm.
you're going to leave and you're going to look for somebody else to tell you how to do everything,
Yeah.
right? Which is oftentimes going to be your environment. You're going to be your friends, going to be people who don't necessarily have your best interest in heart, right? So I think that's really important, allowing your kids from very early age to develop that kind of autonomy. So the first thing I'll repeat real quickly is encouraging positive behavior whenever you see it, rewarding it, right? And then the second thing is allowing your kids to be autonomous and to make their own decisions before they go out into the real world, because they will inevitably have to do so themselves.
And a lot of people, you brought a lot of good point, but a lot of people that I like my age and older, they think of discussion. When your child come and discuss, it is disrespect. I always tell my girls, and I put a line, like I don't play around. Um, it's how you say it. So a lot of parents won't allow their kids to even discuss and voice their opinion and say what they feel, what they like, what they don't like, and have that type of conversation. So, talk to us about this. It was it a privilege that you had with your family, and maybe you didn't see with other kids in their family, and how beneficial this is for a relationship between families and for the kids on well-being to be a good member of the society.
Yeah, I think it's challenging, especially having these conversations with your parents regarding things that you're experiencing, things that are going on around you
Mhm.
that for them were taboo in their circles. It's just hard to talk about. And I can't say that as a kid, I think that like my upbringing was like exemplary in that particular way, but I think that my parents were very good about when I approached them with an issue, right? And they can, and you can tell when it's like a sensitive issue. They were never judgmental in a sense that they would try and be like, "انت غلط, انت ما تعمل الكلام ده, ما تعمل البتاع ده." Like it was always like trying to understand where I was coming from and trying to see why I was interested or why I was intrigued in doing that kind of a thing. And then my dad, like, especially as I got older, he's like, look, أنا ربيتك. I told you right from wrong. At this point, I'm not going to tell you ما تعمل أعمل. He's going to tell you this is my advice.
Mhm.
So it's a different tone. It's not saying لا أفرض عليك, like you have to do it. No, it's saying أنا لو كنت في محلك, I would do this instead of that, right? So in that sense, the kid feels like they have control, even though it's the parent saying really like you should do that, but they're saying it in a way that's like on a level way, right? On a like a peer way. I'll give you advice. So I think that goes a long way, I think.
That's amazing, and this from this network in the show, I want to send the best regards to your parent, because this is the example we truly want to see. We want to see parents who are trying to adapt and be the parent truly, not trying to control their kids or punish them. There is a difference. You can raise your kids without being a dictator, right? And you can have a successful child who is doing all the right things and making mistakes, but again, your punishment is not a punishment. You sit down and explain to them. And you're a good example for someone who, was raised the right way for you. And if anybody listening to us, have a different opinion on ways of raising their kids, we're not trying to change your way. We're just trying to give you alternatives. So instead of criticizing your kids, trying to, like Ladin said, try to listen to them, hear them out, and try to explain why you oppose. So one thing I want you to like quickly talk about is like when we talk about punishment or trying to correct your kids. Um, for me, the method that worked is I don't say no if I don't want them to do anything. Just say no and done. No, I'll say to you no and tell you why I think this is a bad idea. And if it's something that is dangerous or something that is unacceptable on any level, then I will explain it to you and sit deeper and talk. So, how were you like growing up? Was it the same? Like if you are coming and your parent don't want you to do that, and they say no, they explain to you. And do you think this is a good way and like an advice for a parent who's listening to us right now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I really appreciated it. I was always a kid who was curious and hard-headed, well, seagoey, as they say.
Mhm.
So, like, I would always have to ask. I would always have to ask why. And my parents were good about this. They always explained to me the reasons why they said certain things or did certain things or didn't allow me to do other things. And I think that struck me as fair, right? It's fair when they have a good reason why you shouldn't do something, right? And even if it's a reason you disagree with, it's a reason that you can go through your head and think through and be like, I can understand to some extent why they would do that. As a
Yeah.
kid, it's kids don't have really that strongest capacity to do that, but you develop it very early in children for them to think through and then them to have that empathy where they're like, if I were in the shoes of mama or if I were in the shoes of baba, why would I have trouble with Laden doing this in this particular instance? And so as a kid, you develop that faculty, and that I think makes you an excellent communicator, and it allows you to have that empathy for other people and to understand how their views may diverge, but also be justified, despite the fact that they're different from your own.
Okay, so tell me from your, put it on your own words, if you have like 2 minutes to address
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I think the connection is not. Yeah, I think our connection is really bad. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I can't hear you.